Did Swedenborg have any dialogue with Jesus?
Did the angels help us find and connect with our soulmate?
Does Swedenborg mention suicide?
Will we be able to see God when we pass
God
away?
is omniscient, and why would he
How
allow
can someone gain heavenly reward?
Is the afterlife more like
God
When is our soul
Why can storms and
Does Swedenborg tell us anything about our spirit?
Is there any particular
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Swedenborg in Life. We're back in the studio live on Monday night. Thanks so much everyone for joining me. We're going to get to your questions, try to answer them as best as we can. I'm Curtis, and I'm the host of Swedenborg in Life, and we have back with us again the Reverend Shada Sullivan. So nice to see you. Thanks for coming.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and rounding out our panel, Dr. Jonathan Rose, series editor of the Theological Works of the published News Entry edition of Emanuel Swedenborg. And then we have Chelsea Odner, who's a writer extraordinaire on Swedenborg in Life, the show. So thanks to both of you for coming as well.
Thank you, Curtis.
Great to be
And the game is played where you all write stuff in the chat and we take a shot at answering it. So let's get right to it, because as we're saying, even with an hour, it's hard to get through questions. So because there's so much we could say about each of them. So right now, we're going to answer our question. And this one is from Malik from YouTube. Since knowing about Emanuel Swedenborg, going to church has been so empty, because I can now see the mistakes in doctrine and I can't pretend to be enjoying it. What do I do? Mm-hmm. So Swedenborg has made you into a church snob. What is your first step? So here you go. And you may have, it may be something you used to enjoy, and now you're starting to see, wait, there's some cracks in the foundation. What can you do? There's something you can get out of it. And I'd be interested. We got a couple of reverends here. So what do we do in a situation like that? Do you want to kick it off, Dr. John?
Sure. You're in good company. Emanuel Swedenborg found himself in the same boat.
Oh.
He stopped going to church, and people were critical of him, but he just couldn't, it was hard for him.
Yeah.
He also, interestingly to me, says that there are worship services, there are church services in heaven, and when people disagree with the preacher loses the inspiration and can't go on. So it's interesting that that's a thing in heaven.
Who out there disagrees with me? I'm not feeling it right now.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's me.
I'm pretty glad that doesn't happen here.
Do you want to leave, or is it good, or what?
That's a rough gig.
Yeah, it is, and I know it is really hard. It's difficult. Churches can be places where you can participate with other people, volunteering, and friendships and stuff like that. But there are some churches that are just a little closer in perspective than others. So maybe shopping around a little bit. I don't know. It's difficult when that enjoyment has gone out, because that enjoyment in worship is a precious thing.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
Well, as somebody who is now in a pulpit,
Yeah.
my heart immediately is like wishing for everybody to go to church, and
Right.
the idea, that people might not feel sad because wherever it is, because church attendance is declining, and that feels, difficult for those of us who are leading. But I think what I immediately am thinking of is how important it is that church is a community of people.
Okay.
And so it's not just an intellectual exercise, although, certainly that's a really important part of it. But the community aspect can also be something that can be really fulfilling in terms of doing good things together, or, working for social justice in the community. Those are things I think that bond us in a different way beyond, particular doctrinal tenets.
Yeah.
So hopefully there's a place that, the question asker can find that kind of bond that exists for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Chelsea, do you have any further thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking similarly of, like, if you can't find a place that thinks the same way as you do or has the same perspective, you can look for a place that builds the kind of spiritual community that you want to be a part of, So I know people who go to a certain church congregation because they love the food pantry that it provides, or, this or that. They just love to be a part of those sorts of activities. And the only other thought that comes to mind is that because church attendance is going down and people are researching that, why is that happening all over the place, across traditions. But more and more people are coming up with ways to build spiritual community that isn't the sort of cookie cutter framework of a church service or, what you're necessarily used to. And so I feel like more and more people are coming up with, different kinds of small groups that you can host. If you have an intention and you want to build spiritual community, there's sort of tools or resources where you could find a group of people who do think similarly to you and then start something,
Yeah.
And I don't always agree with what I'm hearing in church, and sometimes I try to just tune it out if I really realize I don't think I'm into this message or something like that. But it's hard for me. I was much better at it when I was in college, but
that's right.
I've sort of lost the ability to, tune it out.
Yeah.
So assuming that Malik wants to stay in the church, I have a couple of thoughts of what you could potentially do. One is thinking about what's my role in this community. Whereas before it might have been, I'm here to learn and receive what the church is telling me that I need. You could be seeing yourself as, okay, well, I feel like maybe I have an inside scoop on something that even the church doesn't, but I can still be here as somebody who's trying to pull things in the right direction somehow. Like that I'm a contributor in my own way to it. Also, I wonder, Swedenborg talks about in, I believe it was the ancient church, that there was a lot of differing doctrine, but they were all one church because of love. So do you see the love you like in there? Like the people, do you think they're nice people and that they're trying to do, and can you connect with that? And from that connection, get past if the ideas are different. And so, but then again, but you never know. It may still be that at some point you gotta find a different brand for a little while or something like that. So, all right, let's move on to the next one. I said we're just gonna do them. We're gonna move on. So that wasn't so bad. All right, Malik, thanks so much for the question. This is from Matt. Does Swedenborg give any advice or observation on knowing if a thought or impulse we find evil is from within us versus an outside spiritual influence? The most crucial, I feel, of subjects, which is sort of inner discretion, or where are your thoughts and feelings sourced from, and one that Swedenborg has volumes and volumes literally to say about. So does anyone know what's the answer? Chelsea?
I was recently thinking about this for my own self, and it's just, I think Swedenborg's answer would be they're all from an outside spiritual influence. And what that frees us up is, if you start having an inflow of super negative thoughts or something, like it's like the weather, you're not accountable for the fact that a thought might come into your mind, but you're just accountable for, well, what context are you going to bring to it? Are you going to live by that or choose not to? And so that really is where we get our spiritual freedom. And I think that starts with this. It's all from an outside influence, and it's not yours until you decide to act on it, or let it rule the way that you behave in your life. And so you can always be, and we can't, Swedenborg also says we can't, counteract evil of ourselves. We need the Lord's power for that. And so even if we feel like, I can't stop myself from behaving according to this evil, we can ask the Lord for help, and the Lord is able to free us, show us the way out, even if that thought or whatever continues to arise in our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to switch up the order by going second here. Because I just want to say that I know that this idea of outside influence on our thoughts can seem a bit disarming or unnerving initially, but I do think that that's sort of how the rest of life is. Like I'm thinking, this is my mug right here, but actually somebody else made this mug, a different person designed it, a different person shipped it here, and I actually did fill it with water, but I didn't pour the water into the pitcher that filtered it. We're connected with the human race and all of our possessions. Even like I think, oh, here's my hair, but somebody else cut it and somebody else made the little bit of gel that I was like, okay, let me try to make this look good. But there's so much. We interact with other people all over and everything else. So Swedenborg is just saying that in our thoughts, we're part of the same kind of community. We're playing a role, but it's not an isolated role. So I just feel like that's important to, it makes more sense. It's like, oh yeah, that's how all of life is. It's not that we're nothing, but it's not that we're the totality. We're part of this thought community. But anyway, go ahead.
And to me, that shifts the exercise. Like rather than trying to figure out whether it comes from within or outside, then is this evil? Is something in me responding to this or inviting this in?
Yeah.
Is it harmful or whatever? And sorting it out that way. It puts you more, the way Swedenborg describes it, you're more in the position of trying to become sort of a connoisseur of these thoughts, to say, oh, I think this tastes like that particular hell. Right. And sift through them and say, I reject that. I accept this.
Yes, and I like how you said something in you answers to it, because certain thoughts come into my head. I'm just like, that's totally evil and stupid, and I would never even. But other ones, it's like, well, I know why that one's there. So I feel like that's a good way to kind of get a feel for yourself, and like where are my areas I need.
That's
to
right. That's right.
Shauna.
Well, I think it also gets extra complicated when we think about the influence of culture and our environment upon us, the way that those things form us and form our basic assumptions in our perspectives. Because then I think that there's ways in which thoughts piggyback on those sort of natural assumptions. And it's like, being that fish in the sea and not knowing that they're surrounded by water, that it becomes extra tricky to discern thoughts that feel like they're part of the background noise. Because sometimes it's easy to think, like, when thoughts pop into your head that are like a fully formed kind of thing that seems foreign, it's easy to identify that as, what was that?
Where did that come from?
Right, where did that come from? But then when there's something that feels like that's the fabric of the culture that we're in, we can sort of respond to it automatically in a way, because, we've been socialized to. And so that just takes an extra level of discernment. I don't know. That's graduate level discernment, I suppose.
Right. Yeah,
or I don't know.
Well, so Matt's already there. If you're there enough to say, what's up with this thought, you already won a battle.
That's right.
That's just getting there.
Yeah.
Right.
So congrats on doing that, Matt, and hopefully that was useful, and we're going to move right on, like I said.
Thanks, Matt.
This is great. 12 minutes, 2 questions. It's pretty good. All right. This is Katrina. Did Swedenborg recommend meditation? And this gets to the heart of the, practice conundrum.
Yep.
There is so much Swedenborg material, and yet do we really have a blueprint for what to do and how to do it day by day? So I'd love anyone's input on this. Let's see. Shada, do you want to start on this one?
Well, I was going to pass it to Jonathan, because I feel like you have a background in meditation, and I've heard you speak about Swedenborg and meditation before.
Yeah, he really doesn't say, it's true, like he talks about the practice of repentance. He talks about things like, he talks in very general terms about self-examination or things like that. He never says, breathe in through your left nostril, breathe out through your right, or sit in this posture, or do it at this time of day. Or he never says anything like that, which is sort of frustrating to some people. And also, even just the word meditation that he uses, it's kind of difficult to tell. Sometimes it really seems like he means what we mean by meditation, and sometimes it seems like it means more like just reflecting in your thought, like sort of deep thought or something. It's not emptying the mind. It's focusing the mind on something, which is a big part of meditative practice. And yet so much of what he'll say, I was meditating about this, and then I saw a beautiful garden, and there were angels, and, saying, wow, his meditation's going really well, but he doesn't quite tell you, do it exactly this way. I think he was held back from giving us a specific recipe.
Yeah. Chelsea.
I think definitely that did Swedenborg recommend meditation? Is no. And I'm just thinking about my own experience of, I've raised in a community where I was hearing, Swedenborg's ideas my whole life and reading his books for myself later on. And it's always from a place of, oh, what is he doing? It's never other than the practice, live by the 10 Commandments, practice self-examination. He talks a lot about, like you said, the importance of reflection. But then I'm just sort of on the sidelines like, oh, he's describing this state between wakefulness and sleep. And I know for myself, when I'm in that state, it feels like it's a meditative state, or he's describing breathing and, this kind of thing that then sort of ingredients maybe, but no clear way of well, then do this, which I think is fun because it's meant I've just gotten to, explore it for myself and try different traditions on for size in terms of various kinds of practices. So.
Curtis, what was the title of our show about the, it had the hypnopompic and the hypnagogic and
Yeah.
all that stuff. Was that the
Was that the
different
five kinds of-
states, 5 kinds of
5 kinds of spiritual experiences.
spiritual experiences?
I
Right,
believe.
right. That's
And-
a cool show. On this
And that,
topic.
so go watch it if you all haven't. And but to get to that show where we had these different kinds of spiritual experiences, that took some deep dive research on your part. It's not like
real serious.
it's not like you open up. Oh, Swedenborg, his book,
His
States
chapter
of
on-
Meditation.
Yes,
right.
So you have to like dive deep into the stuff he was never going to publish.
Right.
And I don't think
So
I don't
yeah.
think he's trying to deprive people. I think he was trying
No.
to provide something that anybody can access, which is the ideas. And then methodology, though, is where he didn't dive very deep. And I wonder if you can use the ideas as kind of a framework to point tools toward. Like if I'm doing
Yeah.
meditation, what it's, you could very easily do a meditation on what Matt was just saying about identifying thoughts, because there's a lot of
right.
meditations we'll talk about.
That's right.
When a
Looking at
thought
your
comes
thoughts.
in, just let it go like a passing cloud. That's sort of it, but it would just be like, is it a passing cloud from hell?
Is it
or
spiraling toward hell, or is it
So-
spiraling toward heaven?
So I feel like you could get a lot from that.
And the guys in the wigs back then were not exactly sitting around cross-legged on cushions,
Right.
Like
Well, this was before the Beatles.
this was
so.
exactly. That's right. It was in that dark period. Yeah.
Shauna, do you have thoughts?
Well, basically what you were saying, that I think that all kind of awareness practices are just a really good foundation for the repentance work that Swedenborg really focuses on. So I think if he were here, he'd say, absolutely, go for it. Whatever it is that helps our, as you say, inner discernment, then that's a good practice.
Absolutely. And it can really vary. I'm pretty bad at the like still your mind kind of stuff. Like it just ends up being less meditative for me, but there's other things that really get me in the groove. So I think different people find your stuff. Great question, Katrina. And I do feel like that's part of the work of people who are interested in Swedenborg going forward. It's like, like Chelsea, I know you've done like yoga with Swedenborg ideas, and that's, I think, putting stuff like that together is like, those are the tools of the future. So let's keep doing it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think he deliberately didn't. They didn't come pre-assembled for
Package
us or
it in a
something.
certain way, yeah.
We're just sort of making it up as we go along.
Yeah, because they don't be out of date by now anyway. Okay,
Yes.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Let's look at our next question. This is from Praveen. My question is, according to Swedenborg, is everyone eventually able to be reconciled to God? Or are there some people that just can't be saved and are punished for all eternity? Now, Shada, you studied under George Dole, and I feel like he had a really good quote about this. Did you ever hear, or tell me if you ever heard this, where somebody said to him, and maybe this is just like Socrates, like he never actually said it, but do some people really spend forever, eternity in hell? And he's like, well, they haven't yet. Right?
Yeah. That sounds like something he'd say.
So, but I feel like this is one of the, we've probably tried to tackle this question before on this show, because it is a confusing one in that love would seem to dictate that eventually you come around. Yet Swedenborg, while in his earlier stuff, seems to indicate there might be some later on. He's pretty clear, like, no, you get a nature and it stays. So how do you guys read that, and what's the truth? Definitive.
Can I take a crack at that?
Go for it.
All right. I don't think there's. I want to just sort of edit the question a little bit, like in the sense that are there some people that just can't be saved? There are some people who I believe choose not to be. There's nobody in existence who just by their nature cannot be.
Yep.
Like the Lord doesn't allow that to come about. Whenever that even seems like it's close to happening, he shuts that down. He's got to have people who are salvable. Everybody's got to have a shot. But there are some people, from what he says, who, from the choices that they've made, they're not salvable from that position. The things that they love, the things that they reject and fight against. The other thing that I wanted to comment on was the end part about punished for all eternity. It sounds to me, from my reading of Swedenborg, like the punishment phase is relatively brief. Like most people get to the point, it's sort of like, I've pictured it sometimes like a prison where there are some new prisoners, and so they're acting out and they go into solitary confinement, or but after a while you figure out there's no point in doing that. You just get punished, and so they learn how to work with the system they kind of calm down or something. And it's not that he describes hell exactly as being like a prison, but I think it's similar in the sense that I think some people learn to adjust, how to avoid the pain, and they're working, they're doing jobs, they have relationships and stuff like that. So it's not punished for all eternity. I think the punishment is a relatively, it might be a number of years, but I think it's a relatively brief thing until they kind of figure out the system and figure out how to not go through those painful experiences.
There is that. I know I usually bring this up when this kind of thing comes up. Maybe it's the end of Divine Providence, where Swedenborg is like, "Forgive me for writing this to fill the rest of the page."
Right.
We once
Evil
did it.
spirits,
Two evil spirits come up from hell, and they have a conversation. Swedenborg's like, "Well, the printer wants an extra page, so I'm going to print what they say," and they're not saying, "This is so horrible, get us out of here, Swedenborg."
Right.
They say to him, like, you're a square for wanting to go to heaven. Like, this, everybody gets to do what they want to do. This is actually cooler here. So it does sound like, divine providence has to have a single goal for everyone. It's not that for the people who are heavenly, it's trying to make them as happy as possible. For the people in hell, it's trying to really teach them a lesson. You're trying to make everybody as happy as they can possibly be under any circumstances, and the more destructive things we choose to bring into our lives, the tougher that gets for divine providence. But it's always trying to give you the best possible life you can have in any circumstance.
I think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Further thoughts? Shout out, Chelsea. Yeah.
Well, just because all of God's actions are according to divine mercy. So, it's not, hell is not designed to be a punishment. It's designed to be, as you say, like the greatest possible level of contentment and happiness that people allow themselves to be open to. Yeah. And to not hurt anyone else, right? Like
Right.
God could indulge the people in hell a lot, and then they would wreak havoc.
Right.
But up until the point at which they are stopped to do that, they are allowed to be what they are, which I suppose is that's an amazing act of love.
It is, yeah. Wesley, the founder of Methodism, was actually upset with Swedenborg because he thought that Swedenborg's hell was too nice,
Yeah.
I mean, you get to have sex, you get to do what you want. If you're into money, you get to be into money or whatever it is. And he said, wow, people on earth have it way worse than Swedenborg's hell. How are you going to scare people with that idea of hell?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think about, like you guys are mentioning, the principles of divine providence, like that the Lord is mercy itself, that part of the nature of the Lord is to be trying to save us all the time and save us from our own evils, and so the angels are totally in line with that as well, and are trying, the best they can do is just curb it, and say, okay, well, you're not allowed to do that or something. But I just think of, I remember us finding for one of the shows about how some of the highest angels are the ones that are present in hell because of the love that they have there.
Yeah.
And so that
Present, not like they live in hell, but they're like helping.
yes, able to sort of keep the
active.
right.
And
so just the way that, even in terms of thinking about being reconciled to God, it's not like okay, well, now we'll forget you guys for eternity, you're just locked up in this place. It's like there's always this action of trying to help and bend and curve as much as possible, but there's this huge force, which is the will of any person, to keep going back to their evils and whatever.
Yeah. Right, and it's a really strange thing I'm still sort of grappling with, but the way Swedenborg describes it, there's something worse than just being thoroughly evil, which is to be part evil and part good, where these two things want to destroy each other in you. And so the Lord avoids that. So the hell is a mercy compared to other situations that people would get into if they were more mixed. So it's hard to wrap my head around it, but he does teach that a number of times.
Okay.
So my view from what he says is that no, not everyone is eventually able to be reconciled to God. But no, people are not in the sustained, ridiculous state of horrible pain and punishment. I think they get over that.
Okay, so that's all we're going to say to this question. Thanks very much. Okay, I think they stopped watching. Now, let's get heretical for a second here. There's the question behind the question is there in the future, come on, you're God, right? If you're God, me and my teeny little job at the Swedenborg Foundation, I'm always thinking like, how can we do something bigger and better and cooler? There's no way that God's like not scheming on some way that it, 45 million years from now, there's not going to be hell, right? I mean,
Right.
what do you guys? I mean, does that
Right.
Well, it goes to the question of what we believe God is, right? I think
Yeah.
Rob Bell asks the question, does God get what God wants?
Yeah.
Right? And if God wants everyone to be in heaven, then God is not getting everything that God wants. And how do we reconcile that with God's power and God's mercy and God's motivation? Or, it's a difficult question.
One of the perspectives on the whole like hell and eternity and question is that I think of is that the hell is eternal because that option always is there for us. Like we are always given the option to turn away from God and so, but as far as like who is spending time in hell or not at any time, I mean, there's just things we just don't know. But, and at the same time, what you were saying about that mix between good and evil or letting somebody become the evil that they really want to be or something. I don't know. It's just an interesting, it totally is a mind bender of a
well,
thing
and
to think about.
so let me know, Jonathan, doesn't Swedenborg answer it a little bit like a lawyer? And he says like, somebody's nature can never be changed to eternity.
Right.
Isn't that different than like? Sure, some natures put you in hell, but like, isn't that different than you have to be in hell for eternity? Your nature can't just be changed for eternity. Because isn't there a scenario in which somehow the nature thing is circumvented or reconstituted, that we already have this fully corrupt will, according to Swedenborg, but yet God is doing this miracle of regeneration and bringing people in that. So can you build some kind of the flying car of the future to somehow fix up somebody who's in that situation?
Yeah, and the cameras are still off, right?
They're
Okay, good. Because there's something that I've seen in the passages that interests me a great deal. I don't know how to put it together, but in some of the passages, he almost sounds like what he calls hell is actually where people go to be punished, and then they go back to somewhere else. There's somewhere that they go down. Like in that one room where people are fantasizing about money and thinking, and they're only allowed to say you're allowed to say what's mine is yours, but not what yours is mine, or whatever it is. There's certain rules that apply. But if anybody tries to rip somebody else off, they go down to a place of punishment, and then they get out. Now, I don't know what that out is or where they are when they're not in, when you read Swedenborg's things like heaven and hell, where he's describing it, it's pretty cut and dried. Here's heaven, here's hell, never the twain shall meet, world of spirits in the middle. Yeah. But when you actually see him describing those communities, hell is just like people who live in this neighborhood. It's more like this world in a way. There's a bad neighborhood, here's a good neighborhood or something. And I'm not saying that the bad neighborhoods in this world are all hellish or something like that, but in other words, they're all living side by side. He talks about in some works that when people sort of get their act together, they just move to a different apartment. It's like it's more all together or something than the kind of separate thing that he just, and so I'm not sure whether sometimes what he means by hell is that place of punishment, and that's quite temporary for people. They get out of there. But what you call that other thing, or is there hell and then there's hell or something, I don't know what it is.
And why all the vastation, like he talks about people who have this really dire evils, and he's like, only after a long period of time can that be removed.
Yeah.
So what's the progression? And where are you going? And if you're going to give me all this human body metaphor, and he even talks about evil like manure, which then goes back in the ground and becomes food, and you can eat food. So it just seems to me like, could he have known something he wasn't allowed to share because it would have made us all spiritually lazy, or B, there's like something down the pike. You'd think there'd have to be, but so. Yeah,
and I think if the Lord sees that there's any possibility of you going to heaven, he'll keep you in that other world for a long, long time. It seems like, hundreds, thousands of years or whatever. Maybe there's a shot, and so people really have to opt in to the hell thing, I think. Okay. But I still like George's answer. It hasn't been eternal yet.
Yeah,
so there's there's still game to be played, still time on the clock.
Okay, so great question, Praveen, and it's just fun to just think about it. And whatever the answer is, it's got to be like, when you finally understand it, it's like, oh yeah, that's loving and wise,
It'll
because
click,
that's
yeah.
the nature of God, right? And
That's right.
reality.
That's the more important thing to focus on.
All right, let's look at our next question.
We gonna turn the cameras on?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, we're back on the air. Mr. Binkers the Cat says, why do some people who commit murder get cast into hell when most other people want to go to hell? Speaking about the damned, of course. Hey, so we're talking about hell. Let's stay on hell.
Yeah.
And I think what he's talking about here is, we talk in this show about, we were just like, playing it up. You want to go to hell. People want to go to hell. But Swedenborg often does say, this person, they was exposed as a murderer and then cast into hell. So
That's
we have
right.
this like, we want to go and we're cast. How do you reconcile that? Or are we just like, saying what people want to hear when they want to hear it?
Well, I guess one thought, the Swedenborg speaks so interestingly about the nature of our affection. Like, we just did this show on the spirals and stuff, and he talks about how we are what we love, and that there's this really intricate process of how you change from loving one thing to loving another thing, because it is our life, and if we get separated from it, we stop existing. So we have to live in the love that we have. And so, but our love is also based on, it's how we are connected to other spirits and angels in the spiritual world. And so it's like this really thick, knotty thing, like at least it gives me that sense from reading what Swedenborg says. And so so in terms of like people getting cast into hell, he says it looks like somebody goes headlong into hell or something like that, but that's because it's being driven by what they love. Like, what they love is just so, it's like trying to hold a magnet away from the other thing, that it's just like, get me there.
Yeah.
And so it looks like they're flying and being cast down, but it's really that their love couldn't let any other arrangement exist.
Yes.
And so so one other thought is just how Swedenborg talks about how to change our love, that's why it takes so long. That's why the last judgment didn't happen till thousands of years after Christ came on earth, because people's loves were all confused with each other. They loved hellish people, and hellish people were connected with these good people, and they couldn't be separated into clean, spiritual different communities where they actually belonged, because of the love thing. Like, that it takes this very slowly, you move from being connected to one spiritual society to then this other spirit that's just a little bit of a shifted love in a different direction, and then another shifted love. And so, like we talked about in that spiral show, if you were just to go like, boom, let me just save you and take you from hell to heaven, you would collapse. You couldn't make it through that process. And so I guess just thinking about it in terms of like spiritual science, in terms of love is a substance and it is our spirit. And so it connects with what we were talking about before, where hell, if you are so embroiled in this, I don't know, like just hearing about the atrocities that people do, like especially, a woman, that journalist was just found who was literally dismembered in a submarine, was just like, who knows what that guy's motive was, who killed her, and who knows did what to her before he cut her body to pieces. It's like, what love is driving that person? And are they just really caught up in it? Like, so they've made that their life? In which case, yeah, that's going to take a long time, to shift, get a little bit of truth in there, get a little bit of shifting from this. But if they've just, that's going to take, a long, long time. And yet I don't think, like God said, like we're talking about, that striving to free somebody, because ultimately hell is its own, false, like illusion. Like, it's not a way to live. It's not blessedness or happiness at all. And so, wanting to change that love, but those are some.
I think it's the Swedenborg's often dancing between what he calls an appearance and the reality, or things like that. I think the appearance is that people get cast down. I think the reality is that they always choose. And another factor that he throws in sometimes, which to me seems just like human nature, I can recognize this in myself, where who wants to sort of face up to the fact that, yes, I chose evil and I feel good about it. No, people want to go, you're hurting me. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, look what he's doing. And they have this big act about how, the Lord's throwing him in. Oh, he's so mean. Oh, look.
Yeah.
Because, they want the self-pity and they don't, why would that falsity want to be truthful about I chose evil because I love it. They went, no, the falsity is God is angry and nasty, and that's why I'm being thrown. And so I think they sort of play that game, and that's why it has that appearance of being cast down. But actually, it's a totally willing gesture on people's part.
Well,
I think,
go ahead.
Oh, so I think our language actually reflects that as well. Like when we think about the power of love, we say we're falling in love, or I think we recognize inherently the power that love has to draw us, the affinity of it, the gravity of it, right? And so, and heaven is built on the affinity of love. So, a really, really strong evil love, like that's gonna create a powerful kind of movement. I think so. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I do want to echo what you guys were saying. It's important anytime you have anything Swedenborg says, like hold it at arm's length, because there are times when he writes according to the appearance, because he'll say cast into hell, but then he very clearly, as you were mentioning, says, well, it looks like they're cast into hell, but really head first, but really it's their own love casting it. But he won't, in all areas where he says cast into hell, make that distinction.
No, that's right.
So anytime that's why we put hundreds and hundreds of hours of content about Swedenborg stuff up, because I really do feel like the more you understand the whole, the more the parts make sense. Because otherwise, I remember when Swedenborg in Life, the show started, it was because we were reading through this section of the world of spirit section in Heaven and Hell.
Right.
And that begins, the world of spirits is not heaven or hell, but a place that we go before we're raised into heaven or cast into hell. Right, so right there, and he doesn't say, "Well, actually, we choose it with love." If that's the only, just be like, "Okay, well, that Wesley might as well written that." But if you look at his theology as a whole, you realize that this is an entirely different thing. So it is like Swedenborg is a risky business to get into without just, okay, I read that, it's bothering me, let's see if, is there a commentary on it. But he does that something. He just will write in the appearance, and it would be impossible for him to explain it every time, because there's so much. And this is my favorite example, I think, is love of God and love of the neighbor. We just recently had somebody asking, that's interesting that love of God is supposed to be on the top, okay, I guess it depends on what kind of God, because it sounds like he's saying the thing you're supposed to love the most is the idea of God is it, but he says in Heaven and Hell, I believe, loving God is not loving God for the image that God projects, but loving the goodness that comes out of God, loving which is a totally different thing. But he's just here I'm going to define it. I hope you read that, because from now on I'm just saying love him. That's the world of Swedenborg, and it's very dangerous place. So you need us to guide you through it, and you can donate patreon.com.
One last,
please.
Just in thinking about our lives, it's so hard to talk about hell from this side of the spiritual world, because we just don't know. We're all still in the world, and anybody who's listening to this show is also still in this world. So none of us are, have the kind of transparency that happens when we're in the spiritual world. So we can't be making judgments on people, but on that principle of that idea of how important what we Swedenborg puts that emphasis on how we live in our lives in this world is really important, because it's going to determine whether we're brought into heaven or cast into hell. Is, even if he's using it that way, it is that whole, that power of love, of the life that we're creating while we're here. And it made me think of, tell me if I'm quoting this wrong, but in speaking, I guess it's in John, where it says the light came into the world, or I'm probably mixing up two quotes, but they hated the light because their deeds were evil, right? Or something like this whole, that it's while we're in this world, that's why that discernment and reflection is so important, because if we're doing something, we might not realize how much that's affecting this love substance, how much we're getting caught up in, netted into a love that really isn't going to serve us in the long run. And so being able to start that process now of holding things, more lightly or redirecting our deeds in a more heavenly direction. So,
and like a parent, I think the Lord doesn't mind using, sort of mildly threatening language sometimes because he has an outcome that he desires.
Yeah.
So
Right.
if we feel a little scared about, I'm going to get thrown into hell, he doesn't mind. He can work with that.
Right.
Right.
There you go.
Great scream name, by the way.
Yeah, Mr. Binkers, very much appreciated. Tell your owner we said hello. Okay, next question. Ramona, I enjoy Swedenborgian life videos, but I'm having trouble coming up with a way to serve. I'm a bit socially awkward and not wealthy or anything. What are some ideas to serve? And that's a great comment, because it is important that when people ask what does off the left eye mean, and sometimes I'll say that part of it is that the left side in Swedenborg is the sort of intellectual side, whereas the right side is the love side. So you've got to, we can talk about concepts and things, but the power in lives is going out and doing things. So how do you do something? And what if there's certain ways to help and serve that come naturally and easily to people? What if it's tougher for us to access it? Do some of us have a harder time tapping into the wellspring of spiritual life? So love to hear your thoughts on that.
I've been talking a lot, but I do have a couple of thoughts. You want to go ahead first?
Sure. I was just thinking that I love Swedenborg's emphasis on that we're all unique. Everyone has their own love and their own understanding. And so there's some usefulness. The Lord didn't make everybody socially, amazing and easy, or so. Some people have a
Type A
difficult time
personality kind
in
of
a social situation. The Lord didn't, not everybody's wealthy or whatever. And there's a way to serve. But what's difficult is we're not born with an owner's manual, so we don't know, what is our way. It's difficult to find that way. One thought that occurred to me is that ultimately, like in the spiritual world, loving and understanding things is actually a useful thing to do. I know that you want to do something more than just that, but loving and understanding things is because everybody does that in a unique way. So developing the things that you love and the things that you understand, but then also just seeking and praying maybe for ways to be able to make a unique contribution that does work. I had a grandmother who felt that she was just, I don't know, she had nothing to offer. And when she heard about going to the heaven, she just thought, well, I don't know what I'll be doing. I guess I'd be making sticky buns because that's my main thing, or something. And that's what she thought she would do in heaven. And trying to find a way that, this is something I love, and finding a way for people to need that. But I so appreciate the heart in that statement. It's just a beautiful statement, hey, I'm in, I want to help out. So I really love that spirit.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was reminding me of the show that we did called Does My Life Matter? And similar to what you said, you are a unique, loving, and understanding creation that the Lord made. And so just that in itself is so important. And in that show, we talked about how somehow even our existence in this world, if we don't feel like we're being majorly of service anywhere, we are actually this anchor for the spiritual world for some, societies of spirits and things like that. And so, like you said, loving in whatever way feels true to you is a way that somehow is serving also just the unseen part.
That's right.
Of the world. And and also, and similar to what you said about seeking and praying, I just think I think the word is meant to be that manual that we can go to. Developing a personal relationship with the word is a way to maybe just move forward to really see how the guidance that you can get from the word and how it might not be telling you do this today, but it's going to be giving you guiding principles of trusting that the Lord's providing you, that he is giving you a future with hope, and, just is going to be leading you every day, and I will show you the way in which you should go. And, just that being able to put one foot in front of the other and trust that any earth or people, any objects that you're coming in contact with, the Lord will make you of service to them in some way.
I withdraw my remark about the owner's manual. That was a very good point.
Shada?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love the emphasis on everyone's uniqueness, because there certainly isn't not only one way to serve. And what I really do love about the Swedenborgian worldview is that everyday moments matter, right? Like in a person's life, but also in the trajectory of the world. You know, that there is no such thing as too small a way to serve. You know, that it all really counts. And I think that's wonderful. And of course, sometimes that means that we Swedenborgians forget about collective action, but that's okay. You know, like I really think it's beautiful, the optimism that can be found in just the small things. And so I know for myself, sometimes I just tend to discount the small things. And especially as someone who is also something of an introvert, you know, it can feel really hard to, like, even the being present to somebody in simple things, like saying, you know, the niceties of life, but then sometimes that can really matter to somebody. You know, like really looking someone in the eye and saying thank you, or you know, that presence, I think, can also be service in a way that sometimes we just forget about. You know,
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
and that the way that our culture is going, actually, I think presence is becoming so much more underrated than it used to be, you know, and that I think that kind of service to the world is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to tell you a joke that my sister once told me. So one day, Jesus returns to the earth. It has Jesus in it, if that's all right. And he says, all right, hey, come on, all the rich people, all the cool people, you're coming with me up to heaven. And they're like, yeah, that's great. And the rest of the people are like, well, wait, you said that the meek would inherit the... Oh. The reason for me telling that is, like, if the truth is going to set us free, it can't be that the truth works out better for people who already have stuff. You know, that if you're saying, hey, it's all about going out and serving, that's what's the best of life, but I don't really have the means, you know, Ramona says, socially or with monetarily, then it's got what the thing that I love about the essence when I read something in Swedenborg that really, like, that's awesome. It's because it destroys those hierarchies and networks. It makes it so that that life is just as good for everybody. So it's got to be that whatever the truth is just as good news for Ramona as it is for everyone else. And it makes me think of the widow that gave 2 mites.
Right.
And that's a whole lesson. There's not that many parables that Jesus wants to get in there, but you know, that matters. And so I think about the intent, that it's the intent that matters, that if you are where you already are, Ramona, of saying, I want to do something, that is an asset on the ground for heaven. And that's going to be something that they're going to tap into and use. And I also say that, and this is corny, but like, I think you did a little serving right here by saying, good. Hey, I have some things that I feel like are shortcomings, because we all do. It doesn't matter if somebody who's rich and seems to be popular, I'm sure that there's stuff with them that they're like, this is a problem. So to draw focus to that we have these things about ourselves that we're wondering about, that's just like, we don't always think of that in spirituality, sort of like the personal journey. So I feel like just us talking about these concepts in light of that is important. So I think honesty and just being who you are in that case, we're talking about your experience, I would say, matters. And so you did a little something there, and hopefully that it just more and more will come. So I just really appreciate you being willing to share that with us.
There's that other parable also where the people who come late in the day to serve in the vineyard, and they get just as much, you know, payment as the people who were there all day. And so also people can feel like, oh, it's near the end of my life, or who knows, you know, I don't know, like people can feel like, oh, I've wasted my life and I haven't, you know, been of service in the way that maybe I would dream to be. But it's like, doesn't matter, you know, that timing is right now is what's important to the Lord. So
I think that's part of why, and I know that this does sometimes defeat collective action, like you're talking about, but why Swedenborg is saying, hey, the way that you help is do what you do with love and integrity, whatever your daily routine is. I think part of the advantage of that is that otherwise it's like, well, I know somebody who like went, to blank country and helped out so much, but I've just here, and like, so it's not like a who can outserve somebody else,
Yes.
but it's
Right.
You all have access. I remember once my cousin, I'm just like naming relatives of mine, but she was somebody who was that person. Like she went everywhere to every continent, did all this serving, and she once said to me, actually, like, the place you're best primed to help is the place you're native to, because you know the language, you know the culture, you actually can do more there. And I would take that down a scale to like the people that you know in your life, the things that you're doing, you in some way you're like set to. So I'm not saying don't go out there and do all kinds of cool stuff and reach across the world and do stuff, but also that every time you do something with love and integrity or with the intent towards that in our own little lives with the people we're around, that's cool too, which we already know, but it's just good to say it. So
Good.
Okay, hey, let's keep going. I said we would
right.
keep going. Let's keep going. Great question, Ramona. Thank you again. Okay, next one. Ben, wondering about reincarnation. I've seen the show dedicated to this topic, but are there any further thoughts? Okay, so we did a show, and the show was called "Do We Reincarnate?" And we essentially just gave out everything that Swedenborg says and looked at particular parallels that while he doesn't seem to advocate for reincarnation into the physical body, a lot of the stuff he describes happening in the spiritual world is very similar to what a lot of cultures have described as reincarnation. So, Shada, I don't know if you've seen that show or not, but we're trying to think beyond that show. So I'll let one of you two start this. Do you have any further thoughts, either since the show or stuff we didn't get to cover there?
Well, a show on spirals influenced me so much. I was very affected by that, and the thought of going around and coming around again, and then you're just ahead a little bit and all that kind of thing. One of my thoughts is sort of more intellectual. It's just that I really think from what Swedenborg says, because there's something somewhat similar to reincarnation, which is the idea of the pre-existence of the soul before the body.
Okay.
You know, like the soul is up in the spiritual world, and then you choose who your parents are going to be, you get born here, you forget all that, then you go back, because it's kind of part of reincarnation, because every time you reincarnate, you've been in the spiritual world, then you get born again. Swedenborg emphasizes that the only way to form a human mind is in a human body. Like the spirit does not form up in the clouds, or so. This is how the Lord knows how to do it. This is where our minds and hearts develop. So there's kind of a structural problem with the reincarnation idea to me, because it's got an element, and your body really, although you can't see exactly how, but it really is the body of your spirit. I mean, not to be morbid, but when you see a dead body, like, there's nobody home. I mean, they left. That animating spirit is gone. It's really you
near-death
that's living.
experiences. People always report like looking back at their own bodies and like, who's that?
Who's that?
Yeah.
Right. Nothing to write home about. And so the idea that you would be in somebody else's body, or that you'd have another body or a whole series of bodies or something like that, I just think it's a weird thought. I think it comes from some wisdom, as your show indicated, that was true about the cyclical nature of how we grow and develop over time, and also from that the deja vu thing, like just the fact that spirits influence our thoughts, and so they even have access to our memories, and occasionally their memories leak into ours, and so that sort of makes you feel like, well, wait, I'm remembering something that I don't remember. I must have been, but when you figure the spirits in, I think there's a better explanation than reincarnation. That's my thought.
Very good.
Nice. I guess one thought that was maybe tangential to the show, but not necessarily further from it, but because I am interested in reading about the sacred texts that do talk about reincarnation as it's what's happening. And I haven't studied a whole lot, but in one of the Upanishads, there's the story of this guy named Nachiketa, and he goes and visits death, and death teaches him about reincarnation. But the language there is so much about, another common symbol in those texts and also in Buddhism is the wheel of samsara, like this, the birth and death. Someday you will escape that hamster wheel of birth and death, and then you will be enlightened. And the language around that is really so easy to understand that spiritually, correspondentially, of like our proprium, that part of ourselves that just thinks we live of ourselves, and it's just like one day to the next, when am I going to get what I want? And now I've lost what I want, and now I want that, just that attachment, all that stuff. That's that wheel of birth and death and birth and death and birth and death. And same with even just the level of ourselves that is so caught up in the world of change around us. Things are always changing, that I see just those teachings about reincarnation being about that ability for us to find our centeredness in the Lord in us, consciousness that is eternal and is, always there apart from you running on your hamster wheel every day, and so that we can break free of that cycle of samsara when we come into that awareness, of consciousness. So I think that, it's not even about, for one, yes, there's this cycling and spiraling that goes on for eternity, and I'm going to be so interested to experience the appearance of time in the spiritual world. I don't know what that's like. Yeah. But even just for our lives in this world, we can, contemplate the difference between, am I just caught up in reincarnation? Because it's not like reincarnation is meant to be something you are doing. It's the idea that you eventually stop doing that. Yeah. Yeah. And so like the grander principle is like, how are you just living in this birth and death cycle right now, and how could you connect in with this, with eternity now, which we have that show, how to connect, how to live in eternity now. So.
That's right. But basically, any phrase you can say, we've had a show with that title by now.
Nice.
So, given all that, Chada, do you have any thoughts you want to just kick out there?
I'm not sure I do. I really actually appreciate the spiral metaphor that you're speaking of. I think that fits in really well with the idea of reincarnation, and that optimistic sense you said of actually finally reaching what feels like solid ground, in a way, like something that's actually like, this is who I am, or maybe you lose the sense of self, but that this is my spiritual home or my spiritual place, like a final sense of peace, I think is a really optimistic outcome. And there are so many ways that we experience little deaths in our life, I think, of parts of ourselves that we once considered really important. And so I'm actually really, I'm going to have to do some thinking about this sense of reincarnating in our own selves then. Like, if part of ourselves die, right, what does that mean to then reclaim our sense of self and to reincarnate into our own sense of self after we experience these deaths that seemed, really important to us at one point, and then we recognize don't serve us or God. Yeah, what does that mean to rebirth ourselves, in that sense? That's kind of cool.
I never thought about that. If your love changes over the course of your life, you're incarnating a different love, learning how to have that different love living in that body or something like that. That's a very interesting thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of love, so love is truth. I think about the love, like we were talking before, different churches, different doctrines, same love. And the love I've seen behind people who are digging the idea of reincarnation is, even though myself, I'm not sure about it, but the one thing that I think people like is it diffuses some tension around competition. Like, oh, well, you may have lived 14 more lives than me. Like, why are you so much wiser than I am. Right? Okay. But also this sort of like, oh, you do choose your parents, and that there's a level on which we're all buddies. You know, that things get so twisted and crazy down here, but it's like, okay, when we get back to the other side of the curtain. So whether or not that's happening, I love the idea. So I'm just thinking about the good heart that's in there. So it's just cool to think about somewhere we're going to meet where you find the love and the truth together, whatever that means. But so anyway, I thought that was cool. I think we're going to do one more because I think that clock is like 1 minute fast. So let's do one more question and then we'll wrap it up. And this is from Pirate Bird XBA. The thought of two people merging into one angel is kind of frightening for me. I sincerely hope Swedenborg says it's just how it appears in heaven and not actually two people becoming one. Well, and if you're scared of that, there's a lot more to be scared of in heaven, because Swedenborg will talk about whole communities appearing as one angel and the whole of heaven appearing as one. So is it a terrifying place? And it's certainly like, yeah, the Swedenborg does talk about the intimacy in what he calls conjugal love getting so intense. But yeah, is it like you lose your sense of identity? I'd love to hear. What do you guys think? What do we have to tell Pirate Bird?
Well, I mean, the question of identity is something that Swedenborg talks about sometimes, but I think the most beautiful teaching that he has about it is that the more angels are willing to give up their own sense of self-identity, the more they actually get their own sense of self-identity, right? Like it's this complete paradox, and I think that is sort of where these ideas are all going, right? This like when we cling, like what are we clinging to? When we cling to our sense of self, what is the clinging about? I think is the main question, because I don't think that in any sense God is wanting to obliterate us for any causal purpose. So like our selfhood is incredibly important to God. It's absolutely necessary for being able to reciprocate love to God and to other people. So our selfhood is paramount, but the question is what animates it or fills it or gives it its internal, right? Like, and how do we hold it? I think are the questions. And so and I think that has relationship to how we understand becoming one with other people too, right? Like, and I completely relate to this question, by the way, just like this, like I'm talking as if, like I completely understand, but it's like, no, I get this question for sure. Yeah.
Well, there's a passage that I happen to remember, Divine Providence 4, subsection 4, that talks about that a form is more perfect the more that its component parts are distinctly different and yet working in harmony. And I like that, and I apply that situation to marriage as well, that I really think what Swedenborg's talking about is not sort of a merging, like there are some polyps or something that when they get too close to each other, they just merge into one thing. I don't think it's, honey. I don't think it's like that. And Swedenborg is so big on that idea of love, and that love being so intense and so beautiful and such a focus of so many things. And there's just no log. If your spark plug is too close, there's no spark, right? Like there's no gap in there. I think there has to be an absolute sense, and I do see some things that Swedenborg says that there's a real sense of this is someone outside of you, like if you're in one of these couples, there's totally somebody outside of yourself, You don't feel like, oh, I forgot, is that my elbow or your elbow or something, but
except on your anniversary,
which would be creepy, and I think it is a realization, like the way that he says that many people in a group, in a company, in a society, all kinds of things will function as one person. It's not that you lose the identity. The cool thing is that you have all these little identities that are going into this larger identity. So I think it's a bigger thing, not a mushy merge.
Right. Right.
So this is a Swedenborgian conundrum to have as a parent, because when my daughter asked the other day, or one of my kids did, Mom, are cells people? And I just, I said, well, no, they're just cells. But then that just sparked so many thoughts in my mind, because Swedenborg says that heaven is like one giant person. And so if you bring that down to, as little as component parts, you have these little cells that are all being themselves. I mean, it's interesting when people are finding out about how the different, flora in our guts affects our sense of ourselves. But in thinking about the principle of what you were saying, Shada, about how the closer we're united to the Lord, the more clear and distinct our sense of our own identity is, that the marriage between two people is an image of the heavenly marriage. And so what Swedenborg, which exists in the Lord, and that heavenly marriage, Swedenborg says, is very much like the marriage between our heart and our lungs, and we're all used to just seeing, oh, here's your lungs, they breathe, here's your heart, it pumps, or whatever. And but you could never actually have heartless lungs or lungless heart, like that,
right.
Those two. And I was thinking about it the other day, there's ways you can draw it in an anatomy book or something like that, but you couldn't actually disentangle the heart from the lungs or the lung from the heart, because they are entirely co-innervated and, just their little
right.
tiny capillaries and vessels that feed into each other. Like that binding there is so complete. And yet we don't call it one organ, it's not your
And they don't control each other, I don't think.
No, right.
I mean, they affect each other, but they don't.
Yeah.
There's not one that's the master and the other's the slave or something.
So I just think that perfectly. The human body is just such a great place to find things to contemplate around that idea of the more distinct the things are, the better it all is, actually. And that's just so true of every part of our body.
And I feel pretty clear it's not a hostile takeover of one person over another. It's not like, okay, I'll be the person and then you be the puppet. That's not how it works.
And Swedenborg says that angels are horrified by the idea of two people ever being the same.
Yeah.
right.
Everybody is distinct, and that if you try to imagine two people that are the same, angels actually recoil in terror.
Yeah.
So this, even though there seems to be like, hey, there's going to be so much intimacy, like in all area, heaven is just layers of intimacy on intimacy. It's never right. There is always distinction, and if you think, you guys mentioned the God-person relationship, which Swedenborg does talk about married couples getting really close, but the God-person relationship is even closer because God is where your life is coming. But even there, doesn't matter how close you get. The more close you get, the more you feel autonomous, independent, like you already said. But that's so central to the divine design. Like that's
right.
That's there for the long haul. And you even think, you talked about love and wisdom being in God. You'd think, all right, well, if everyone was perfect, it would all just be what you could even talk about God as love and wisdom, even though they're both in there. But there's distinct.
Right.
Even there's enough distinction.
There's distinction.
They're the same, but there's enough distinction. And that Swedenborg mentions multiple times, that you gain more and more of this autonomy no matter how close you get. So it's got to be that if marriage between people is reflecting the heavenly marriage, is the same thing of that autonomy, and that's the point of what happiness is. Not like I am everyone. It's that I can help someone who isn't me or give them happiness.
Yeah.
That is heaven. So we gotta all be our own players in order to make the game for everyone else. So.
And there's a great feeling of being at a sporting event or something like that, where like everybody in the stadium's like, wow, you're all roaring together. It's fun to be part of a oneness, even though it's made up of all these individual parts.
Yes.
So that's a good feeling. But I think it's like that feeling, not like a feeling of someone else controlling your brain or something.
What I thought of before was, it's not unity of person, but unity of purpose. Like that's heaven.
Yes,
is this like
right.
We all so love this cause and are wanting the same. That's wanting the same thing. And Swedenborg even says for conjugal love that it's you want what the other one wants, and that's what it is. Not that you are the same. Like you want their happiness, they want your happiness. Like not like to possess it, but to give happiness to someone. So anyway, it's not something to be afraid of. Whatever it is, just like with the hell thing we were talking about before. Who knows what this stuff is actually? We're approximating it. Whatever it is got to be cool. Like when you actually understand it for what it is, because it's love and wisdom in essence that are making it. So there's no way that it's like we would sit here and realize, well, that's a weird thing, but God is just like, well, I just want to do it. That can't be how it is. It's got to be something that you're going to be like, oh, that's legit. Like I like that. So
I love the honesty of just saying. It's actually frightening,
Oh, totally. No, I remember when being a younger person, like when I was first coming across that in Swedenborg, I was like, that's weird. I don't like that. There's a ton of stuff in Swedenborg. But now I just assume like, well, it's going to be awesome. Whatever it is going to be good. Because I've like, I don't know, gone brain dead there, but I'm just like, whatever it is, it's got to be good, by the time we get there. So, well, I guess that's a good time. So one more question. It was an extra 10 minutes. You guys got a bonus there. That's because we love hanging out with you. And thanks so much for having the interest to talk with us for this long. And thanks to the whole panel. You are all awesome. I love just hearing your insights and your thoughts. And I appreciate you taking some time on a Monday night here. Everybody, we're going to be back next week, and we don't even know what we're going to be doing. We're going to be on a filming trip to Vancouver, and we're hoping to do a community chat live from the Whistler area. So we'll see. Chelsea, I'll fill you in on that a little. But that's what we hope to do. If not, we'll have something wonderful for you. But hopefully see you live next Monday night again. In the meantime, hope you have a great week and that all your spiritual questions are answered. Oh, right. I was thinking maybe we could end this show with me saying that every time. But patreon.com/opthelepteye if you want to support us and make this show happen. It's a way that you can give just a little bit of money for each episode, and that helps us make this thing possible. And in return, we'll give you a thanks of behind-the-scenes content. Sorry, Shada, about your head there. But this week we had some... what I would call hilarious outtakes from our filming of the theater scene. You may disagree. Feel free to leave a comment about it on Patreon. But join to get all kinds of behind-the-scenes thoughts and access, and just our little way of saying thanks for making this stuff, the big show, the Monday night stuff, possible. So again, everyone, have a great weekend. Thanks to the whole panel, and we'll see you all.
Thanks, Gary.
Yep. Swedenborg in Life is Amy Aquarola, Morgan Beard, Curtis Childs, Karen Childs, Matthew Childs, Alexa Cole, John Connolly, Cara Dom, Chris Dunn, Stuart Farmer, Ben Keys, Reed McCardle, Chelsea Odner, Jonathan Rose, Shiloh Silverman, and Shada Sullivan.